Hello, everybody. Everybody can take a seat, please. People in the back, if you can take a seat, that will be great so we can get started.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're very excited to be kicking off a new speaking series that we're going to be launching on a bi-monthly basis called Industry Disruptors. The focus of this is really to bring in those leaders that are driving change both across industry, technology, and expose them to all the people here, the future innovators back here, and the rest of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Tonight, we got an obvious luminary in this space with Brad Keywell kicking off this series for us. And he'll be joined on stage with Adam Waytz, an associate professor from Northwestern. I'm not going to do a full introduction because I don't think I can do any justice. I mean, obviously everybody here knows Brad Keywell, what he's doing with Uptake, and where his sort of journey has been. And I think we're all lucky today to be able to listen in and hear your insights. So thank you very much. I'd like to invite you to the stage, Brad.
All over Chicago, and they're generally at University of Chicago, but the work that he's doing is along the line of totally contrarian to like normal academics and cutting edge as it relates to the stuff that everybody here probably cares about. And I just want to call out, you should remember the name Adam Waytz.
Wow, that is incredibly humbling. I really don't want to take any more of this away from Brad. But I do want to say that one of the amazing things about Brad is that I talk to a lot of people in technology. I'm a psychologist who studies human-machine interactions, and Brad actually cares about the psychological implications of these interactions more than anyone I've met. So I'm just going to get us started with a really obvious question, which is I want to go back to the beginning on Uptake, and I want to ask you, how did the idea for Uptake develop?
Excuse me. There's a pattern recognition that I think all of us develop with whatever we do. And we all have a unique observation of our lives and the things we interact with, and at some point you develop certain patterns that you see. And so this is simply a pattern recognition problem that resulted in an idea. So here's the patterns. One is the reality that the world of chips has absolutely followed Moore's law in terms of exponential processing power and reduced cost. And therefore, pattern is created. And then a quick observation saying sensors look a lot like chips. They're getting better and they're getting cheaper. And so thesis being that's not going to stop. So that's number one. Number two is the cloud. So cloud computing is a thing that starts to emerge over time. And the pattern that I observe is more capacity, less cost. And it keeps going. More dynamic capacity, more exponentially on-demand capacity, less cost. So the pattern is there's something to be done with this new opportunity that is worth putting in the bank. Then the third recognition is connectivity. So mobile connectivity is what we're all used to. And what do we see? More connectivity, more dynamic connectivity at less cost. And then you see satellite becoming more available and accessible as a source of connectivity from ground to something, again, at less cost. And then you have Wi-Fi that leaves the house, and now Wi-Fi exists in the environment through lots of interesting technology that literally says, take the Wi-Fi from your house and chain it together to reach your backyard. So your backyard is now as good as inside your house. And on and so that's another pattern. And then the fourth one is a deeper pattern that is not as readily apparent, which is data science. So we've been building technology businesses for 25 years now, and fundamentally our businesses are around data and data science or analytics or whatever you want to call it, and then applying that to a business problem that is inefficient, that could be more efficient. And over time, what I observed was that the pattern was less about a genius individual having a brilliant idea that just sticks for years and years and years, which is how it used to be. And the pattern was, this is more about a system. And the system is survival of the fittest of modeling. And that system was getting better and cheaper, or better and more accessible. So those four things were patterns that were floating in my mind. And then ultimately, the idea was, if you add those up, what you have is an ability to take data off of sensors that's created by sensors on things and get that data to the cloud, that the cloud can now handle the processing work of turning that data into an organized set of an organized sandbox that you can now use the cloud to store a very large version of that. That connectivity anywhere in the world from an asset or a machine to the cloud is now all but free. And now you can build a system that actually takes that data and applies survival of the fittest type data models to derive insight, which then leads you to say, this might affect the world. And then you look around and say, well, there are some companies that are doing this. They're some of the biggest companies. And then there's few, if any, at the time, entrepreneurs or more agile enterprises that were attacking that problem across a variety of industries. And off the idea went, because ultimately my belief is not necessarily about like disruption, uptake against somebody else. It's about collaborative disruption where we can create something that might actually be a better solution for the global industry than massive companies. Because as entrepreneurs, we have certain agility advantages, and we have certain abilities to not be burdened by a matrix organization or not be burdened by legacy technology. So ultimately, it was pattern recognition meets logic, or the observation that, like, how can nobody be doing this? And then you start to say, what am I missing? And what you realize is you're missing nothing. And therefore, it's time to go.
So I've heard this term collaborative disruption as a guiding uptake philosophy. Can you define that for us briefly?
So disruption I use lightly. So the collaboration I use heavily. So the act of taking data from sensors and applying data science to give insight that could then make industries more reliable, more productive, more safe, more cyber secure, which is what we do for a living, is one that demands collaboration because it's in the enterprise. It's us as technologists working or deploying our products to major enterprises to deploy and be better, be safer, be more environmentally responsible, be more profitable, et cetera. So you could say that's a sale, but I view it's not that simple. It's really about working together to deploy our products to make our customers better, which is really a collaborative. In consumer land, that's very little. When you buy something from Amazon, that's not really a collaboration. It's a transaction, because you don't necessarily buy the next day, and it's a finite event. Whereas our relationships are one where every day, all the time, 24 hours a day, we are actively providing insight in asset-heavy global industries. So our products are now being used in 96 countries. And that in 24/7 situations, every time we give a recommendation, somebody does something. And that's more than a transaction. That's a relationship between Uptake and its products and technology and insights, and the operators that are actively part of these companies and industries. So that's a collaboration part. The disruption is simply, it's not always that a company like Uptake has an effect on industries as large as this, as large as oil and gas and energy and the global rail business and construction. And that is disruptive, and it's more disruptive in relation to this industrial revolution that I do think we're witnessing right now, where there's a new thing that's available for industries to harness and be better. And I think if you look back at industrial revolutions in the past, every industrial revolution has a new set of technology enterprises that get created and that become very significant. So Oracle and SAP were part of a sort of interim industrial revolution, saying there has to be global operating standards. And therefore, they had to create systems, technology, that let the world of a company operate synchronously. And so that's a disruptive part. There's something that has to happen based upon this technology that's available that's now being deployed around the world, and that is, by definition, disruptive because it changes the way industries work. Construction companies now have CTOs. So contractors now have CTOs. That is a new thing. And that brings with it opportunity, threat, change. So very interesting time.
That's very helpful. So, on this note of CTOs being a new position, and on this note of, your initial vision for Uptake relies on these advances in data science, cloud computing, sensor technology. All of these things are fields that are changing so rapidly. We learn new things about them every day. How, if at all, has your initial vision for Uptake changed in the 3 years of its existence? Is the vision for Uptake any different now than it was when it started, given all of these advances?
It's much different, and it's also the same. So the same is the core opportunity, and the core idea is the core of the company. The evolved part is the opportunity has broadened in terms of what we've built and in terms of the products that we've built, addressing a broader set of problems at major enterprises, number one. And it's also changed in terms of the understanding of what matters. So to the point of what you work on, the interrelationship between our products and the users are, has been elevated in terms of relevance and value. And I call it industrial design thinking. It's design thinking, but it's industrial design. It's industrial activity that still requires empathy so that you're meeting the operators and the supervisors and the actors in an industry. You're meeting them where they are, and you're bringing them along rather than pushing them to do something different. You're sort of offering them the ability to be really better and their companies to be better, and you got to make it very simple. Otherwise, it's hard to implement.
Okay. So what Uptake does, you've already named several industries that Uptake deals with: agriculture, aviation, mining, construction, etc. What is the strategy and what was the decision behind tackling several industries instead of one or just a few?
Every company starts with some thesis, and so, and then you're right or wrong, and you change it or don't change it. In the case of Uptake, the thesis explicitly was, and still is, there is enormous value to being in multiple industries, so long as, in my opinion, your platform remains singular. So if, in fact, your fundamental code that supports the activity at the application level, if that code is one instance in the world, and off of that instance comes variety of products and industries, that is impactful and scalable at a level. I mean, that is taking the best of what's happened in the last 20 years of software and putting it to one of its highest and best uses. And it's really hard to build a platform that maintains the sanctity of singularity. And if you can do that, you can realize and offer to your customers the benefit of applications that were built for the rail industry that have huge value in oil and gas. And you can take advantage of data science that was created to serve the needs of the wind turbine space and apply that directly to the mining industry. And you might say, well, how do they relate to each other? And I say to you, a tire in aviation, a tire on a plane, has the same properties as a tire on a construction vehicle. They both are tires. They both have indicators of activity and potential issue that relate to a tire. And we've become experts at tires. And the ability to apply that expertise at scale, efficiently across multiple industries is absolutely core to what we do. And what's happened is, if like philosophically, if anything, yeah, there's something probably somewhat audacious or ambitious about on day one committing to the possibility that a platform in multiple verticals is where the fun is. Because it's probably easier to do one thing and then go to the next. But if you did it that way, you could never get to where we are right now. So I don't know. That's just what happened.
Okay. Well, I'll save this question for later. Personally, I want to know, you don't have a background in aviation or mining or construction that I know of. And so actually, I'll ask this question right now. How do you personally immerse yourself in these various industries? I mean, how do you have to maintain a certain level of expertise given the breadth of your reach?
I have a background in curiosity. And so I'm applying my curiosity pretty deeply. So, and that's part of the culture at Uptake is there, whatever company you join, you're implicitly making certain commitments to be part of something, and therefore by not joining another company, you're not part of something else. And so in the case of Uptake, there's an implicit commitment that you are committed to learn. which is not always the case in companies. A lot of companies are committed for you to not learn and just do whatever you do and don't make a lot of noise. To me, there's value in the reality that if you're not better off on multiple dimensions whenever you decide to leave Uptake, then Uptake didn't do its job on that dimension of learning. And why? And the reason that that's valuable, in my opinion, is that number one, that way we're attracting people that have curiosity, like innate curiosity, because you'll be threatened by the learning proposition if you're not curious. You will devalue what we value, and therefore you'll probably choose not to join Uptake. But if you join Uptake, part of the deal is value learning and curiosity, and therefore there's a good chance you'll have an idea or do something or bump into someone when you're learning like we brought in a magician to teach magic, and you might say, what does that have to do with anything? And I'd say, nothing, and that's the point. It's fun to learn that, and there's something that goes on with your brain when you're not doing your job, but you're still thinking and engaging with others that probably makes us better as a company. And so that same essence of there's joy and value in learning and being curious and interacting with each other, that gives me a sense that I got it, that I've not spent, a career in aviation, but intentional learning can make you, at this age, very conversant very quickly.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been really impressed by with Uptake, I mean, there are countless examples of this, but compared to other tech companies or companies in the space or Silicon Valley companies, just, you have a podcast. You have written a book for Uptake that's won design awards. You have, teach magic, teach philosophy. There's a summer school program for the interns. I mean, this is taking a culture of curiosity really seriously in a way that I have rarely seen before. So I think it's very impressive. And so what I want to ask you now is, we have a sense of the philosophy. We have a sense of, in general, where did Uptake come from? But ultimately what you guys do is you save companies time and you save them money. So could we get into the specifics? Would you be able to give us one or two specific examples of where that saving time and money has occurred?
It comes in lots of forms. When you start to ask why within industry, you find fascinating things. So when you start to ask why does something break, or I'll make it even simpler. When you are supposed to take off on a flight and they don't have a part and they're waiting for a part, why? Are there not enough parts in the world? Did they make a mistake? Why didn't they know? What takes so long? Like, there's a million questions that you should ask, or you might ask, but I ask to say, so why? And then what you start to realize is, so we'll stick on that one. So you realize that there's lots of information about a plane when it's flying, otherwise it wouldn't be able to be flown. And so the pilots know exactly when something breaks because a light comes on. But why is that information not shared with somebody on the ground? And has that light come on enough times, and then the postscript of the light is going to the source of the problem and realizing that it was something else, or that it was what it's supposed to be, or what? So, because with enough of that light going on, and then the investigation of what actually happened, and then what was required to fix it, that's called a pattern. And ultimately, everything about that is available to be delivered to the ground crew and the parts depot and everybody who needs to know. And so that's a real example where technology that we built for the aviation industry is stitches together what the plane is telling you, because a plane is talking to you without you knowing it, and then the correlation of what exactly does it mean when the light goes off, and even more so, based upon a plane that it has 5,000 hours on it, versus 20,000 hours on it, when that light goes off, the real fix is not specifically what was in the instruction manual. It was something that all the people on the ground know, but they haven't really written it down because they know better than the manual, because they're doing condition-based maintenance and not time-based maintenance. And all these little things, when you put them into a logical system that is not so mysterious anymore, it clearly was, we can talk about, well, there's a side note here, but when you put that together, here's what you save. Time. You save 200-300 people's time who otherwise would be sitting on the ground waiting. You save the time, and you save money because you have either fewer parts or more effective use of parts. You've got more effective people that are mechanics who are better. You're better able to judge whether they're good or bad. They're better able to do their job because they can benefit from past mechanics and what they've learned over time, and on and on and on. So ultimately, it's time. It's creating more money because there's more productivity because the plane's flying more often. It's creating more reliability of the asset, so the asset now has more useful life and less downtime. And as a side note, it creates more environmental response, more environmental goodness, because one of the things you can do better in some of the industries like rail is not waste gas. So I'll give you one more example. So in the locomotive space, a substantial portion of the world's locomotives are optimized and overseen by Uptake's technology. And we are talk about like learning. I don't know if it's everybody or just data scientists now, but for a time when you started on day one at Uptake, you got a pair of steel toe boots. And the philosophy was you're going to go to the train yard, or our people that are part of the energy wind space were out in Iowa last month climbing on top of a wind turbine. Because if you're a data scientist, the whole fun of it is seeing that your data science actually matters. Because your other choice if you're a data scientist is to go work for a hedge fund or something like that, and that is fine, but it's not as I would propose, meaningful to the world in a lot of ways. And so the activity of going out and seeing what you're doing and how it matters is part of being at Uptake. And in the process of that, one of our locomotive teams was at the nation's largest rail maintenance facility in Progress, Nebraska. And they observed a train like fully revved up going nowhere. And the observation or the question of why simply led to, well, that's just how it works. Well, that's how what works? Well, we want to test how the train performs at full throttle, so we put it in this little thing that stops, and we throttle it up. Okay, then why? Well, that's how, so fundamentally we're like, well, we could solve that problem because we actually know exactly how the train performs when it's full throttle because we just saw it full throttle yesterday. And as of last month, we had saved like 29,000 gallons of gas. We created something called a virtual load test. That was an idea that somebody had, and they did it. So,
I mean, when you describe these examples, it sounds obvious. It sounds obvious. Why isn't every rail company, every construction company, any company that deals with machines or manufacturing adopting these new technologies? And so my question is, are there barriers or are there challenges to bringing this very 21st century technology, machine learning, data science, robotics, to these very old industries? And how do you overcome those barriers if they exist?
Of course, yes, there's challenges. Everything is hard. And everything in the world is hard, other than laying down, I suppose, and going to bed. I mean, although that's hard sometimes too. Yeah, exactly. For my birthday, I got a card that said, things are good when you are at the age where you want to take a nap and you can take a nap. So I guess it's not always easy to take a nap. But the hard part is so everything's hard. So what's hard is that what I'm describing has to be absolutely precise. because it really matters in a big way. And every time you're giving a recommendation, likely somebody is going out to do something and verify and validate and act. So the efficacy and the integrity of the platform is at a whole different level, and that's hard to trust, I would say, for some industries, to believe that you actually know something. And then, like, I'll go back to the wind turbine example. Oh, another thing that's hard to believe is that it actually works. Like, it just works. Why? Because we've been trained by SAP and Oracle and others that it doesn't just work. You have to buy it. You have to then hire a consulting firm. They have to configure it. Then you've got to have another firm that installs it. Then you've got to do all this kind of stuff, and it might work. And that's why 83% of ERP implementations don't. So the thought that in an enterprise scenario it works is a radical thought, and people are not used to it working. So in the case of, with Berkshire Hathaway Energy, we turned it on, and 2 days later we said this turbine number, which is 4 hours away from where your closest team is going to break very soon, and it's going to be I don't know, I forgot the name, but like a serious, catastrophic kind of failure. So go right now and take these parts and do this, and that's a trust. Talk about like people trusting a math, but ultimately a team goes in a van and they go and they drill a hole in the white vertical cylinder, and they use a boroscope, and they confirm that we're right. And so that's how you build trust over time. And then on a more macro sense, there is always, I believe, if you study history, which I do a lot, especially in industrial revolutions, you see early behavior that in retrospect you can't believe. So there was an outcry in the second industrial revolution. There was a job to walk in front of a car to make sure that nobody would get hit. And that was that people were employed to do that. When there was first cars, you're like, how do I, and that job goes away. And there's an acceptance over time of technology that at the beginning you're like, how would I ever trust whatever it is? So part of the challenge with what I'm talking about, as simple as it sounds, is human resistance. Despite any amount of logic and any amount of competitive reality that either you are taking advantage of the opportunity to be excellent or you're not, in which case, competitively speaking, you've got an issue that only exacerbates over time. That logic is hard for people to exercise in positions of leadership because leaders are not paid to take risk, always or often. Leaders are paid to not take risk. So there's a lot of psychology around not just the operators and then the influencers of a decision, but ultimately the leader of a enterprise that's providing energy to a country or to a state or a county. For that person to be a bold actor or a thinker is something they probably want to do, but deep down there's probably some fear because it's anything but the known. And so dealing with that psychology through examples and through the reality that we've been past the first couple steps, it's now out in the world, it's being used around the world, is helping get over stuff like that.
So you mentioned leaders are not paid to take risks, and this is a huge risk you're taking starting this company. I could argue that another risk you're taking is basing the business in Chicago. We look to these companies and we typically think West Coast, we think the Valley. I know you're a Midwestern guy, but what was it about the decision to base this in Chicago, base Uptake in Chicago, and keep it in Chicago? What's behind that?
I grew up in Michigan. I did go west. I stopped in Chicago. And that's where I live. So, and I've never bought into the sense that there's anything not, and then fill in the blank in regards to our community and our local or broader community. I mean, this is, so I could go off on a whole tangent, but the educational institutions here are among, in terms of a concentration and quality, if those are the multipliers, I'm not sure there's better. In terms of livability, I'm not sure there's better. There's some close, but we've got a great thing going here, and I believe now, pattern recognition-wise, that the belief that something is magically better there's value to not following the traditional. So if there's a cliche, like you got to be somewhere, says who? Number one. Number two is there are phenomenal companies that have been built, not just in Chicago, but Indianapolis, Minneapolis, Detroit, Columbus, Pittsburgh, Toronto. I mean, these are great technology towns, and I think we're almost done with the thought that technology is in one place and not everywhere. At this point, it's everywhere. And so, and I think the silicon and fill in the blank is at some point also going to be done. It's just what we are as ours is, you know, maybe other countries are not as centric to technology being pervasive, but our country is built on innovation and risk-taking and progress, and that's how we've led globally, and that's why we've got the resources we do competitively in the world, and therefore we are adapting right now in real time. And not, you know, Uptake's way out there in terms of ahead of a lot of things, but technology is everywhere, and then therefore you'd say, well, therefore what's the best place to be? And I'd say for a company like Uptake, right around here, because industry, like if you look at our company, there's a platform component to what we do that is common across every vertical, every industry, if you will. And then all the industries are led and staffed by and made up of excellent people from the energy space, the aviation space, the construction space. And this, where else would you want to be? It's a pretty great place to be for talented, passionate people who come out of industry, who want to be disruptive or progressive in technology. So couldn't be happier.
So you know this, but as we all know, Amazon has announced that they're searching for their second headquarters. And in your honest opinion, you know, everywhere from Pittsburgh to Chicago to New York has been floated. Does Chicago have a shot? What do you think?
I think that first of all, I think that Jeff Bezos is amongst the greatest operators of our time. So he's one of the great operators in business, period, of our time. Not just technology, just business. And if you study Jeff, which I know him, but I also study. If you read every annual letter he's ever written in one sitting, and you read everything else you can read about the things he's learned that have resulted in the way he operates, what you find is a person who has tried to solve for every possible inefficiency or excuse that could get in the way of speed and iteration, like learning. So this man is a master learner. I mean, we're talking a master. And what that looks like is, how do I eliminate a reason that I couldn't learn? And a great example was way early in the evolution of Amazon, he realized that if there's not a fluid interaction between everything that company does, then the interaction itself will become a source of friction, and you can do less. And so 2002, 3, 4 maybe, is this like now famous memo where he said, fundamentally, you are responsible for building either literal or metaphysical APIs in and out of your function with every other function in this company. And if you don't, you're fired. Period. No discussion. And certain things have to be absolute. I'm coming to the answer of absolute in terms of what must exist in order to achieve things like logic-based decision-making. All of which is to say, if there's one decision I would propose is purely based upon an algorithm of facts and has nothing to do with lobbying or relationships or influence, it's this decision. And beyond that, I know as much as anybody else knows, but I do think that if there's such a thing as a purely deeply data-driven decision, that has genius behind it in terms of how to arrive at a decision that takes every available input and results in a beautiful output, Jeff Bezos is the one who can execute that level of decision-making genius.
I appreciate that data-driven answer. All right, so being mindful of time, I know we have a hard stop at 6:45. I want to ask you one last question, then we'll open it up for a little bit of Q&A. Are there any last words of advice that you would offer to folks in the audience who might be the next generation of industry disruptors or collaborative disruptors?
The advice is the same thing I'd say to those who ask me for their advice about a business idea, which is don't try to convince anybody that you're right. Try to ask them why you're wrong, and try to orient yourself around the possibility that you're wrong. And if you can then survive an emotionless process of collecting as much information as possible, as fast as possible, because, by the way, people are much more willing to give you feedback if they know that there's permission to be honest. And if you say, I'm right, I'll tell you why I'm right, that's not a very honest conversation. So if you reorient the conversation around an honest curiosity to say, how am I wrong, then you will hopefully kill and destroy your bad ideas. And the odds are 99 out of your 100 ideas are horrible. And then probably one of them is okay. So the patience of allowing ideas to come and go and either live to be inspected or die quickly if they can easily be killed, and not put your pride on the line with every idea, you will likely find something that actually matters if it survives that. And that way, when you actually go to do it, if you meet early friction or hardship or resistance, you'll know for yourself that it's more destiny than possibility. And if that's the case, then you'll get through it. Because great ideas, really great ideas that really have some sense of destiny also depend on one or some people who are certain that they're right. Because if they're not certain, they're willing to allow temporary or pockets of resistance to somehow get in the way of that certainty. It's a long answer, but if you really want to do something that's my litmus test for, does your idea survive that? And one other thing, when I say does it survive it, have you actually found have you actually found a relevant set of people and things and research and evidence to prove to yourself that you're not wrong? So it requires the ability to say, am I wrong? And also the willingness to find every possible person. For Uptake, I was talking to people in Scandinavia. There's amazing things going on in Eastern Europe, and then in Scandinavia, research and practical applications around predictive analytics in industry. And that's where I found myself meeting people over Skype and over the phone, saying like, tell me what I'm missing. Yeah, that's a long answer.
No, that's great. I did ask your daughter Chloe if what's the best advice that you gave her, and she summed it up as be you. So that's the other answer. And she says hi, by the way. All right, so let's open it up to a few minutes of Q&A, being mindful of time. You have the mic. Great.
Hi, thanks for doing this. My name is Sabrina, and I work for the Illinois Institute of Technology. Woo! I'm curious to know, you gave advice to younger people, but I'm wondering, other than telling everybody they need to learn to code, what hard or soft skills would you suggest students learn to enter and survive the new business culture?
My answer would go way too long because I feel strong. Because my daughters, I have a daughter just started college, another one is a senior, and I think that the university system is failing its job of creating people who can be great at jobs. and the general, like the word vocation within a university environment is inexplicably and inexcusably toxic. It's like a bad word. And what we should be yet here's in Europe, there's a direct link between university and industry. So that lack of a link is bizarre given how expensive it is to go to college, number one. And number two is innovation, or any of these sub-concepts of design thinking or 3D modeling or whatever it is, they don't fit at universities, which is outrageous and offensive, yet the tenure system protects universities from progress. I can go on, and I feel strongly. All this being said, the list of stuff I think kids need to learn starts with shaking hands. And then from there, it goes on and on. But it starts with speaking up, being fully present in the moment, and shaking hands with eye contact. And then we can go on for hours.
Hi, Brad. Thank you for this conversation. My name's Niraj, and I have a question for you. I've experienced at some major manufacturers, legacy manufacturers in this country, and what I've observed is that there's a lot of old equipment out there. And with the value proposition of predictive analytics, how does Uptake help some of these organizations that are maybe risk averse understand the return on the value that you provide? When there's one equipment, maybe it's 10, 15, 20 years old, it's used every day, and when it goes down, it's really costly.
There's one machine total?
Yeah.
Well, there's less value if it's one machine, and if it's your pickup truck, there's not as much value as if it's 10 machines on a construction site as if it's 100 locomotive, But so with one, that's more of a consumer transaction. There's lots of companies that are trying to find sources of value like lower insurance cost as a way to justify understanding of the telematics data that come off of a car or a truck in a real-time manner. So there's lots of value stories that come out of knowing what's happening at all times. But in a broader sense, that's really our job as in business, as if it weren't hard enough to build products, and hard enough to build them well so that they work and they withstand the test of scale and time, and hard enough to organize a company that has great culture and grows with stability and values. Then you have to convince people that you're right, that they can be helped, and it's behaviorally, economically irrational that even in the face of evidence that everything you do can be better, people at times say anything but yes. And so that's the job of entrepreneurs, is to use every logical, rational tool in your intellectual toolkit to communicate, which is part of the thing we have to teach kids, to communicate that it's worth it. And in our case, I think the insight that we're acting on is how close to it just works can we get? And we're getting very, very close. And what that means is you're turning the enterprise software landscape totally upside down, because we've been trained by these big software companies like Oracle and SAP that what do you mean it just works? It doesn't work that way, is what you would hear if you say, does it just work? And they'd say, it doesn't work that way. Here's how it works. And then it just works someday, and you're like, that just doesn't work that way. Now that's getting to be sensors, and the ability to take that data from sensors and know the future. That's enormously valuable, and we are, first of all, it's happening. So it's no longer that we're close. It is now happening that the inevitability of that value implementation is actually happening.
I guess we do have time for another one. Yeah.
I'll pass it on. Hi, I'm Rashmi, and thank you for being here today. Quick question. I'm just curious about what's the process, how do you approach your passion for disruptive technology, innovation, and collaboration and kind of align with it with the business model. So how do you kind of bring it together, and if you can share a short story for that?
I don't understand the question.
Okay, so my question was that, you're talking about your passion, about how you approach things is about disruptive technologies and collaboration in the area, but how do you bring that together with the business model?
Oh.
How do you apply that, and what's the process of doing it?
It's the opposite. The
Okay.
business model starts. If the business model doesn't work and doesn't make money, there's no business. And without a business, there's no ability to have culture. And without culture, there's no, so it's just a waterfall. But it's got to start with a business that's good. And then you can start to, if you take a business that's good, that makes money and makes the world better, and that can make not just, one little thing better, but can make the whole world of a thing better, now you're into something. And then you've sort of created for yourself the permission or the opportunity to have a great's a bad word, to have a purposeful culture. So a lot of people create, then don't.
I mean, we heard the word, the world of people more, but it's so just awesome to hear these words top of mind from you. And I also just want to say, we're in this beautiful space. There's a buzz in Chicago right now. There's an energy in Chicago right now that was not here 13 years ago when I arrived here, and so much of that is because of Brad. So I want to thank you very much.
Appreciate it. It's very nice. Thank you. And I'll give my plug for mHUB, and then I got to go. So the plug is there's a significant value to creations like this. And I think that, I'll speak for myself, at times you take for granted things, whatever it, you think things just happen, or they just are. And my appreciation is that mHUB doesn't just, it's more than it just is. Like, there's a purpose to it, and what it is, it creates the condition for either people bumping into each other and meeting each other that could lead to something, or it creates the conditions for access to a machine or a technology that's not affordable, that lets you play around with something that then lets you have an idea that then gives you the ability to buy it for yourself. And it creates a place where people that are like-minded around commerce and creation and intellectual property and innovation to come together. And this community has benefited from this a lot in numerous instances. So the fact that there's something that is so close and core to where I think the world of industry is going is phenomenal. So, I know a lot. This is the first of these speaker events. So, it's an honor to be the first one on, to be the first one here in this concept. And second of all, everybody here who's been involved in this place, is a creator. And this world depends on creators. So you should all feel good. So thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Brad. Thank you, Adam. We appreciate you all joining us tonight on this rainy day. Our next Industry Disruptor event will be on January 10th. We do welcome you all to come back. It will be with Chris Galvin, former CEO of Motorola, and Michael Seidman, formerly with US Robotics, who will be talking about the modem wars of the 1990s and communication technology trends as we move forward in the fourth industrial revolution. I invite you all to join a tour, have a drink, and thank you again for coming out.